This project is made possible by support from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Missouri Arts Council, and the Kansas City Art Institute. Welcome to the Mother Ann podcast, where women who are both artists and mothers discuss their diverse experiences as creators and caregivers. I'm Eleanor Lynn Midyett, project manager and co-curator of the Mother Ann Project and assistant professor of liberal arts at the Kansas City Art Institute. I'm also the mother of 4 sons. Each episode features discussions with artists and other individuals involved in the Mother Ann exhibition, which runs from September 5th to November 21st, 2025 at the Leedy Volkus Art Center in Kansas City, Missouri. The exhibit and the podcast disrupt preconceived notions that parenthood diminishes one's artistic practice and celebrate motherhood as a source of expansive creative potential.
I like to think of it like when I'm a mother, it's basically I'm giving and I'm giving. And the creative cup keeps filling me up. When I go back and create, it gives me more in my cup so I can in turn give it to others, to my children and to others. It's a cycle.
In this episode, I speak with artist mother Sukanya Mani.
Hi, my name is Sukanya Mani. I'm an interdisciplinary artist and mother. I work with hand-cut paper, found object installations, and it is a pleasure to be here with you.
It's a pleasure to have you. So you're a multidisciplinary artist and you're also a mother. Could you please share with us what stage of parenting you're in?
Yes, my 2 sons are grown. My older son is 24 and my younger son just turned 15. 2 independent boys.
A great accomplishment. So, did you always know you wanted to be an artist?
I have always wanted to be a storyteller. I didn't know how I was going to tell stories, and drawing and painting came naturally. And so I used that as my voice to tell stories. So yes, in a way, I've always known that I wanted to create and share stories.
Wonderful. Do you see a common thread between your parenting and your studio practice?
Absolutely. I see a common thread between my parenting and my storytelling, my artistic practice. It also ties in with the stage of life that I am in. The way when the kids were younger and they demanded more physical attention and work, the artistic practice was more scattered. It was not disciplined. I also feel like part of it was more not intellectual pursuit, but more learning the techniques of craft. I often didn't have the mental strength to delve deep into a subject and explore it. But what I would do is do things with my hands, create crafts that I could do while watching my kids or reading them stories or something that did not involve a lot of concentration at that point, more of something, an activity for my hands to do, for example. And at different stages of their lives, my artistic practice changed and shifted. Now it is actually the almost the other end of things. I spend 90% of my time researching and analyzing and understanding. And the creation of the artwork comes in all the way towards the end when it is presented to the viewer. But I would say almost 90% of the work is in my mind, in my brain, trying to understand and figure things out.
So your practice has really evolved as your sons have grown then. I'm really interested in storytelling and how storytelling is integral to your practice, but also integral to your role as a mother. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, I feel like my artistic practice matured in its emotional intelligence as my kids did. It's it is an interesting way to look at it, but that's how I feel. I feel like as they became more understanding, more mature, more philosophical, so did my work. Now, coming back to your question of storytelling and child rearing and artistic practice, in my case, they're all intertwined. I grew up with in a family in India. My parents, my dad and my mom are both storytellers. My dad, especially. My mother was the person who would, cook the food and give me food and take me to the places and dress me and all of that. But the way my dad and I connected was over storytelling. He would either read or tell me stories while I fell asleep. I remember when we would have power outages in India fairly often. And so he would just drag a couple of pillows and a mattress out into the rooftop or the courtyard, and we would just we would lie down under the stars and he would tell me stories. And it was just it's a pleasant and very loving memory I have of listening to stories. So the artistic practice starts by collecting the stories either through reading or listening and being parts of conversation. And once I have these stories, I figure out a way to physically present them to the viewer. And it is a similar practice in my motherhood, in my day to day lives. When we are cooking, for example, this is how my mother used to make this stew, or your grandmother ground her own coconut when she would add this to the dish. So these are just small tidbits, but they are stories. That's the way to keep these people alive in our lives and in our memories. And through the artwork, for example, in the Thuli piece, I have my mother and my grandmother literally suspended within the artwork. So the artwork is a collection of all of these stories and timelines of these women and the stories that each viewer brings with them. So when a viewer is standing in front of this piece, I hope they think about their own birthing experience, or maybe their neighbors, or think of a story that somebody told them at some point about how hard it was the first month after having a child. Or maybe look at it from a child's perspective. This is what my mom used to sing to me when she would rock me to sleep. So the idea of storytelling not only comes from the artist, but comes from the viewer and then meets in the middle, the artwork.
Is there a favorite story that you remember that your dad told you that you shared with your sons also?
Many stories. So, growing up in India, there is a rich mythology of history and stories of kings and queens and gods and goddesses. Just a rich mythology of stories. Um, and two of the really deep, big stories are the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. They are two epics, and they have very, very layered stories. And so it's a story about human drama, it's a story about mysticism and the history of India. And so those stories I have shared with my children as well. And they have grown up here in the United States, so it's another way for them to connect to these names and the rivers and the mountains and what the landscape of India looks like. And so there's just so much in these stories. So I have shared those with my sons.
That's wonderful. A way to connect to your sons personally and then also to connect to their Indian heritage.
Yes.
So, Do you see your studio practice also as a way to reflect back on your cultural heritage and maintain those connections and tell those stories?
Absolutely. My studio practice directly ties in with the stories that I have been told and also the way I have perceived these stories. Now, going back to these epics, I have always tried to understand why women especially are depicted the way they are. Why do they act the way they do in these stories? A lot of my artistic practice is directly tied to women and their realities, both in mythology and you know, in real lived experience. I strongly see the connection of how our ancestors, our female ancestors, are portrayed and how we are living our lives today. The stories of our ancestors, especially our maternal ancestors, and the stories of the women told in historical times directly affect the way we live our lives today. So, a big part of my storytelling is trying to understand these ancient women in contemporary times, at the same time, giving grace for the period that they lived in.
So almost homage to the matrilineal, matricentric aspect of Indian culture and giving it sort of a modern feminist platform then a little bit, yeah.
Absolutely.
Do the historical figures from the stories that you heard as a child, do they figure into your hand cut paper pieces at all?
Yes, many of these mythological and historical figures feature in my artistic practice, especially as paper cut figures. In one of the pieces that I have created, it's called Sola Singar, which is 16 ways of adorning yourself. And in Indian practice, the 16 different ways are flowers in your hair, a bindi or a mark on your forehead, your bangles and your necklace, and things like that. So, in ancient times, the way the women dressed was having all of these adornments on them. And this particular piece directly talks about women and clothing in contemporary times, especially when we talk about ideas of rape and sexual violence, and how very often these very adornments are brought up to blame the woman. Why were you dressed a certain way? Why are you wearing perfume? Why are you attracting a male? So you were asking for it. There are a lot of those questions that are tied in with the way women adorn themselves. But going back to ancient times, this is the practice. If you're a woman, you have to dress, you have to present yourself this way. You don't have a choice. So that dichotomy of, do I have a choice, but am I also being punished for it? So taking aspects of history and mythology, but also looking at it from a contemporary point of view is very important in my artistic practice.
Do you think you feel a certain amount of freedom as an Indian American artist, female artist, to be able to address these issues?
I don't know if there is any freedom except that I have some natural knowledge of growing up in this culture. So I'm able to bring in that experience. I don't know if I have any special freedom, but I would like to say that I do have an experience that I would like to share.
Yes. So, having sons, then, how do your sons feel about your work and how do you explain your work to them?
That is such an important question. It goes to the ethics of mothering that we briefly talked about. So I feel like my voice is unique and I'm using my voice in a specific way. Yes, I use my artistic practice to talk about these things to the viewers, but even if there is no viewer, I still have the responsibility to teach my children what I see, how I perceive women's realities, especially to the next generation of men. The idea of women and equality is very different. If you ask every single woman has a different description of what equality would be. But to be open to that idea of how do you talk to somebody else, especially another woman, about what it means to be a woman living in today's society. It was really important for me to talk to my sons about where I stand on these things and the history of their maternal ancestors.
I love that how your work operates on a universal global level, but then also speaks to your sons in a very direct and personal level as well. So, Sukanya, as part of your studio practice, your artistic practice, you use a lot of cut paper, hand cut paper in your storytelling to tell the stories. Can you explain to us why paper as your medium?
Yes, I'd love to talk about the story of how cut paper became my language. There were two paths almost that led to it. One is the technical aspect, and the other is my scientific background, because I studied chemistry and physics in my college, not art. So when I came to the United States, I had a dependent visa, so I couldn't work. And that also meant that I could just figure out what I wanted to do. And I've always wanted to create art. And so that's what I did. For a long time, I was struggling with paint, and I painted in black and white for a while. And then I just realized, why don't I, instead of painting the color black and white, I'll just do positive and negative shapes. So I started cutting things out. And that's where the technical part of paper cutting started for me. I also am fascinated with the way light and shadow hits this cut paper. Um, and initially, I was trying to recreate some of these scientific experiments using cut paper. So I would see how space expands a piece of paper and then how you can crumple it back. So I was trying to use light, space, and then when I suspend it, gravity, because it's pulling the paper down, it's giving it a shape. So I was playing with this concept of light, space, gravity within my work. And the stories that I was trying to say were stories about women. And I was using papers like visa papers. These are the papers that we used to come here to the country. So I would cut that paper out with some of the text left in. Um, and I was trying to play with the idea of how, especially people who speak different languages, don't always get the nuances of English. So if you take part of the text out, you're left with half of the information. What does that look like? So there was a lot of intentional philosophical part behind the cut paper, but also the technical idea of incorporating science within this language. Um, and the cut paper makes beautiful shadows. You have to hang it from a ceiling and then light it, and then you get these gorgeous shadows, which also brings in the idea of women's realities and how so much of it is hidden, so much of it, other things are said, and many of them are not said. So the idea of light and shadow and cast and not being seen, all of that played into the intention behind using paper. Paper is almost sculptural, like you just take away things you don't need and it creates this beautiful piece. So it's almost like sculpting, but you do it on a two-dimensional material. Paper is very fragile. Once there is a crumple, it stays forever. Again, echoing the idea of how women and women's virginity, women's honor is tied to, once there is a question in her character, it stays forever. Very similar to the paper that's crumpled. You can uncrumple it as much as you want, but it has memory. There's something sticking to it. So this material really spoke to the kind of stories I was saying.
Yeah, so hand cut paper and paper cutting then really seem to capture the duality of women's experiences, but then also immigrants' experiences too through your use of the visas. I think that's fascinating.
Yes, the visa is it's a piece of paper, but to an immigrant, it's a lifeline. I know a story of a friend who recently was their house caught on fire, and the first thing they saved was their documents more than anything else. That's how precious it's tied to identity.
My parents were first generation immigrants to the United States, and I know my mom, both my mom and my dad, but really my mom really struggled with raising children with, understanding what it was like. They were Filipino, and so being raised in Filipino culture, but then coming to the United States and having American culture. What was that transition like for you, growing up in India and then raising sons in the United States?
As an immigrant, I'm forever living in two cultures. One is the culture that I was born and I grew up in, and the other is my adopted culture. When it comes to parenting, I have always understood that our children have a very different identity than our own. The way they assimilate into the American society is not going to be the same way I assimilate. And I have to understand that and give grace and space for that. One of the important things that I wanted to do was not thrust a language or a culture on my children. Instead, offer it in a open and interesting way through food, through clothing, through rituals, and let them absorb as much of it as they want. It is more important to understand and absorb the ethics, the what is right and what is wrong, than just speak the language. You know, to me, humanity is what's more important. So there is a lot of my Indian culture in my kids, but it is what they have chosen to absorb into their own lives.
So the work that you're showing at the Mother and exhibition is Thuli is just really a stunning work and visually and also conceptually. Can you describe that piece and how you came up with that idea and what it means to you to be able to showcase that work in this show?
Thank you so much. Yes, I would like to describe Tuli, the art installation that will be included in the Mother and art exhibit. So, Tuli in my native language, Tamil, means a cloth hammock. So, women over generations use the sari, which is the garment they wear around their body. They tie it to the ceiling and it looks like a cloth hammock, and newborn babies are laid inside this and then they are gently rocked to sleep. And it is an interesting time in my life as I'm going through menopause that I was thinking about postpartum care, which is the other almost where things started and now where I am in my menopausal state. The idea of the Thuli came when I went back in time and I was reflecting when my children were born here as an immigrant, away from my family, away from many of the traditional practices, including food and care and rest that is given to a young mother when the child is born. So, me and my partner took care of my newborn sons when they were born. And at that time, that seemed like the right decision to make. However, now in retrospect, I see how much of that knowledge I have missed. We did have medical care. We could call a doctor, a pediatrician, a lactation specialist, but I couldn't call my grandmother and my great grandmother. And I couldn't figure out what foods I should eat that would help me heal. A lot of the focus was on the baby and not enough on the mother to heal. And that was the idea or the inception behind this piece. So, to describe the artwork, I have collected donated saris, and they form a central hammock in the middle of the piece. And surrounding this fabric installation is paper cut figures that are hanging around the sari. And the paper cut figures are homages to our maternal ancestors. There is a paper cutout of my mother and my grandmother in there. And then there's also paper cutouts of ancient goddesses, not only from India, but from all over the world, because these maternal practices have been passed down from generation to generation in every part of the world. That's how women used to take care of themselves and the new child. And I thought it was really important to bring it into contemporary society where women, unfortunately, may not have maternity leave, may not have a job to go back to if they don't start working right away. And so, at the detriment of their physical and mental care, they have to rush back to work. So, the idea of how do we marry these ancient practices and these modern medicines to create a new form of care for mothers. And also, how do we form a community? Because there is a sense of isolation in a new mother, even though there are millions of women having children. Many of the young mothers I speak to feel like they're in a bubble, they're there by themselves because they're not able to talk to other people around them. There's no sense of community. It feels very isolating. So, how do we build these communities? How do we build these spaces so we give the mother the care that she needs so she, in turn, can care for her child?
Yeah, I remember you telling me about this, about the Tuli and the postnatal care. I feel the postpartum care, and I remember thinking, why don't we have this? I remember you told me a conversation that you had with your mother when you told her that you were pregnant with your first son and her concern. Do you mind sharing that with us?
I would love to share the conversation I had with my mother when I told her that I was going to have a baby, and she immediately thought that she's going to come here and help me, or I'm going to go back to India. It was just, this is how it's supposed to be. It didn't work out. It was not easy for her to come here at that time. And so she was distraught. She said, how are you going to have a child away from everybody you know? Who's going to feed you? Who's going to take care of you? And that also speaks that we come from societies where this support system for women exists, and when they are taken away from this support, there's nothing to replace it. So there were a lot of phone conversations on how do I make this dish and what do I do now. He's not, I think my son is constipated. I think I'm crying every 20 minutes. What's going on? I wish that there was a way to create that community here and learn at that age how important rest and care and nutrition is. Which is why I'm on a mission to to talk about it now for new mothers. Please don't forget about yourself when the baby is born, and take care of yourself as much as you take care of your child.
Yeah, I'm so pleased that you're actually in the show so that you can initiate these conversations that I think people are not having about, caring for new mothers and the importance of community and support. So, back to your sons. When they were growing up, did you intentionally foster creativity, as an artist, mother? And do they have a creative practice now?
I did foster creativity, and one of the things that we talked about is creativity comes in many forms. You don't have to draw and paint like me, but you have to have a way to express yourselves, to understand yourself. Both of my sons are musicians. They're not painters like, or visual artists like me, but um, they do like to occasionally doodle and paint, um, just as a way to calm down. One of the other parts of my artistic practice, or just my way of life, was also this idea of sustainability and the ancient knowledge and ancient practices which have been lost over time. So there's no one right answer to a question. Let's take some time to explore it. Um, and with as artists, we are naturally uh, I should speak for myself, low on resources, so we have to make do with what we have. And I like to think that I passed that on to both of my sons instead of just thinking, okay, let me go and buy this, or let me go and spend money on that. Figure out a way of how do we exchange from with someone who already has an item or a material. How do we make it ourselves? How do we repair something so we're not just constantly buying? Also, the idea of listening. I think that's not stressed enough. A huge part of my artistic practice is listening to other women. Even my maternal grandmother, great grandmother, my paternal grandmother, I can't listen to them anymore because they have passed, but they're still telling their stories. I can go back and look at the images. I can ask my dad about the stories of his mom. We need to respect and listen to where we have come from. And I like to think that that's something I have really stressed to my children. One other part of this experience has been cooking together, which in my culture is traditionally a woman's place to cook in the kitchen. But both of my sons, I'm happy to say, are very handy in the kitchen. They are very good cooks. They know how to nourish themselves and take care of others. And the idea of cooking for yourself and a loved one is not service, but it is nurturing and it's care. And when you're looking at it not as servitude, but instead changing the conversation to how important it is to learn to take care of yourself through the food that you're eating. And these are all knowledge and wisdom that our ancestral mothers have told us. They have fed us and passed down recipes. And I would like to think that I have passed at least some of it down to my sons.
Yeah, I love the expansive definition of creativity that you fostered in your sons through music and also through cooking. Has motherhood ever, or can you think of a time when motherhood was ever a challenge to your art practice, or maybe how the world's expectations for motherhood posed a challenge to you?
Many times, motherhood has been a challenge, both in positive and sometimes in negative ways. Motherhood takes up a lot of time and mental strength and stress. Anytime that my children have not been well, they have a fever, they are hurt, there is no space in my brain, unfortunately, for creative. There's no creative thought in my brain. It's all about caregiving at that point. So time, which is a finite thing, is really fragmented. There are women that can do these things simultaneously. I am unfortunately not one of them. I have taken large chunks of my time away from creativity and being a mother. It's not, I won't say that it's not wasted time. It's a time that's used for a different purpose. And as a mother, caregiving and nurturing is what we have signed up for. And it is really important, especially when they need us. Having said that, that is constantly filling into the creative cup, right? The mothering cup pours into the creative cup. I like to think of it like when I'm a mother, it's basically I'm giving and I'm giving. And the creative cup keeps filling me up. When I go back and create, it gives me more in my cup so I can in turn give it to others, to my children and to others. It's a cycle.
You talked about your father and your mother and your relatives in India as role models. Have there been other role models for being an artist mother that you've encountered in your journey as an artist?
I have had multiple role models, but not one person in particular. I take bits and pieces from people around me. The idea that I don't have to create and sell to be a successful artist came from another friend of mine who talked about their creative practice as it doesn't have to have a commercial end, but it is about sustainability, about making yourself feel fulfilled, and also paying it forward, helping other young artists, talking to your family, teaching them the idea of you need something, let's figure out how to create it. That idea is maybe not commercially viable, but it is so precious for families. And many of my friends and my relatives have lived their lives as mothers. One of my role models is the artist Ruth Asawa, who builds these gorgeous installations with woven wires. And yes, and it's a womb-like, beautiful sculpture. I had not figured out a way to suspend my work until I saw Ruth Asawa's pieces, and then I was like, that's it. That I know what I'm doing. So technically, the minimalistic installations of Ruth Asawa has been a huge inspiration in my work. Keep it minimal, keep it clean, and hang it from the ceiling. I get that from her.
Sukanya, you talk about the importance of community into your art practice. Can you talk about maybe some of the teaching and mentoring you've done for other artists and trying to foster this connection to community and maybe how that relates to being a mother?
Absolutely. One of the ways that I carry my artistic practice forward is to share the experience that I have had with especially newer mothers, up and coming artists. Um, I've had a lot of people approach me, and especially within the immigrant communities where having an artistic practice is not common. It's a very unusual choice to become an artist. So they reach out to me and say, what do I do? Can you give me some guidance on who to talk to and where to go? So not only does it help to have somebody who can connect you with galleries and museums and teaching opportunities, but also the ideas of looking at art not from a commercial point of view, but more of a creative pursuit that you can sustain for a longer period of time. I'm also part of an organization called Mid America Arts Alliance, which does almost professional practice, professional development courses for artists. From practical things like how to write your artist statement and resume to more intangible concepts like how do you manage your time or how do you create a sustained practice, how not to give up. I think having all of these years, 20 years of experience, has helped me come up with some sort of a skeleton of what works for me. And I'm happy to share that with other artists.
Do you think being a mother impacts the way you interact with people then in terms of mentoring and teaching?
Yes, mentoring is another form of motherhood. It's just passing on knowledge and information. It's also, as a mentor, I think you have to be open and kind, and and that is something that motherhood teaches you how to do, how to think of the other person more than yourself, and be receptive and open, and understand that where people are coming from now is very different from where you came from. For example, I met somebody the other day, this was recently, the last couple of months, and I was talking about these 5 organizations in St. Louis, and they already had Googled that. And I was like, yes, of course, you can do that now. I didn't realize that when I was, you know, living in St. Louis 20 years ago, I was not able to just make a list of art organizations in St. Louis that I could reach out to. So you have to understand that the needs are different, and maybe you can figure out where to go, but I can help you with ideas of time management and not multitasking. Let's not multitask. Let's do like men do and do one thing at a time, and the world can wait.
Well, I love that prioritizing and also an empathetic approach to mentorship. So I want to do a shout out to Kimmy Kitata from Charlotte Street, our mutual friend. I'm so glad that Kimmy connected us, and that was actually led to you being in the show. What does it mean to you to be a participant in the Mother and exhibition and project?
Oh, such an honor. I came into this group of amazing artists very late, and it was a chance coincidence. Thank you so much for putting my work in there. I think I see some of the conversations that the other artists are doing, and it's incredible. I feel very honored to be part of this show. And I feel like there are so many of these voices who are talking, and together it makes a strong conversation, because a lot of these artists are talking to each other. And there is a lot of overlapping, but there is also so much of unique perspectives, people coming from very different backgrounds. And the work itself, aesthetically and physically, is so different, but it's a unifying language. I'm very excited to see how the show is going to come together, and uh, I know it's a tough job for you, Eleanor, to make all of this work, but I'm so confident that you're going to do such a wonderful job.
Well, thank you. I love how you phrase that as a unifying language, how visual art by artist mothers is a unifying language. You really bring a unique perspective. I think this idea or the need for postpartum care. And also earlier in the interview, you talked about how isolating it can be to be a new mother, and also I think to be an immigrant as well. So the sense of community is really important, I think, and one of the objectives is of the project is really to foster this sense of community between artist mothers in the United States and internationally too. So thank you so much for agreeing to be part of this. And I really think you're a very important voice and glad that you're included in this conversation. Thanks, Sukanya.
Thank you so much for having me.
This podcast was produced by Clio Scroll Productions, with Kara Heitz as the director and Emily Milner as the audio engineer. Music is by Brooke Tooley and the Moon Travelers. The Mother and project team includes Eleanor Lim Midyet, project manager and co-curator, Courtney Wasson, co-curator, Laura Berman, senior consultant, Stephanie Leedy, Leedy Volkus Art Center owner and mother of the Crossroads, Erin Woodworth, Leedy Volkus Gallery Manager, and Debbie Barrett-Jones, Leedy Volkus Gallery Assistant. An extra thank you to the Kansas City Artists Coalition, Distribution by Air Company, and Hotel Indigo for their support. Don't forget to listen to the other episodes of the Mother And podcast, and also remember to check out the Mother And exhibition, which runs from September 5th to November 21st, 2025 at the Leedy Volkus Art Center in Kansas City, Missouri. More information can be found on their website at www.leedy-volkus.com. That's www.leedy-volkus.com. Thanks for listening.